The hum of the ceiling lights trembled above me as I walked in and found my son rehearsing a speech that erased my name completely. Still, I kept my hand steady on the back of the chair, letting that same electric hum calm my breath instead of fueling my anger. As the sound deepened, it seemed to expose every quiet year he'd slipped further from me. While I stood there, the hum turned into a reminder of how easily a father's worth can be rewritten. The same vibration carried a truth I'd avoided for too long. He hadn't forgotten me, he had replaced me. That's when I knew revenge didn't need rage. It needed one silent choice that would make him remember who I am. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Frank Doyle stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of the crisp blue shirt he'd ironed twice. He wasn't usually this particular about clothes. Decades as a fire chief had taught him to value practicality over style. But tonight felt different. It had been years since he and Adam had shared anything that resembled closeness, and the rehearsal dinner felt like a chance to bridge the distance. Frank smoothed the fabric over his chest, imagining how his late wife would tease him for overthinking something as simple as dinner. Yet, beneath the buttoned collar and steady hands, his heart beat with the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, this wedding would nudge his fractured family back together. Mia appeared in his doorway, arms crossed and an affectionate smile tugging at her lips. "Dad, you look like you're about to meet the president." Frank chuckled softly, though the sound carried a strain he couldn't hide. "It's Adam's night," he said, adjusting his sleeves again. "Haven't had many of those in a long time." She stepped closer, reading him the way only a daughter could. "You're nervous," she said gently, "but Adam loves you, even if he's not great at showing it." Frank nodded, not trusting himself to say more. Mia's reassurance warmed him, but it didn't erase the unease that had sat under his ribs for months, an ache that whispered that Adam was slipping further into Emily's world and leaving his father behind. The rehearsal dinner was held at a polished, candle-lit restaurant, one of those places where the silverware felt heavier than necessary and the air hummed with quiet wealth. Emily's family had chosen it, of course. The moment Frank walked in, he felt like he had stepped onto a stage where everyone else had already rehearsed their lines. Emily's parents were front and center, laughing, toasting, directing attention as easily as they breathed. Their voices carried across the room, polished and confident, and the guests gravitated toward them like metal to magnets. Frank took a seat at the edge of the long table, unnoticed at first, and tried to swallow the feeling of being a visitor instead of family. Throughout dinner, he caught the subtle jabs, Emily's mother remarking on the quaint charm of Frank's old house, her father joking about how Adam had finally moved upward in the world. None of it was loud or crude. It was the kind of belittlement dressed in polite smiles, the kind that landed softly but stung long after. Frank kept his posture straight, answering with restrained nods and polite smiles, refusing to show the hurt gnawing in his chest. What cut deeper, though, was Adam. His son moved around the room like a satellite caught in the Carter family's gravity. He laughed with them, toasted with them, lingered beside them as if they were the ones who shaped him, raised him, sacrificed for him. Adam didn't even glance toward his father for nearly half an hour, too busy basking in this new world that welcomed him with open arms and subtle superiority. When Adam finally walked past him, Frank straightened in his seat. "Hey," he said softly, "mind if I say a few words later? Just something small, I thought it might be nice." Adam barely paused. He kept his eyes on Emily across the room, offering Frank only a thin, distracted smile. Not tonight, Dad. It's not really the right time." And then he was gone again, swallowed by the glowing warmth of Emily's family. Frank's stomach tightened. The dismissal was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of something larger, something intentional. A line had been drawn, not loudly, not publicly, but clearly enough that Frank felt it in his bones. He was being moved aside, nudged out of the frame of his own son's life. He tried to focus on the conversations around him, tried to convince himself he was imagining all of it. But every time he looked at Adam, laughing with Robert, leaning toward Linda for advice, something inside him cracked a little deeper. The separation wasn't new, it had been building for years. But tonight made it visible. The dinner wound down slowly. Guests drifted out with warm handshakes and rehearsed compliments. Mia stuck close to Frank, her expression protective, but not even her presence could soften the hollow ache forming in his chest. When they finally stepped outside, the night air felt heavy, pressing against him like a warning he didn't know how to name. Frank walked to his truck alone, letting the quiet settle over him. The glow from the restaurant windows spilled onto the pavement behind him, laughter still echoing faintly from inside, laughter he didn't belong to. He gripped the steering wheel before starting the engine, staring at his reflection in the dark window. Something was shifting, he could feel it. Tonight wasn't just awkward or uncomfortable, it was a sign. A sign that tomorrow's wedding might not bring them closer after all. As he drove home under the dim streetlights, a single thought followed him through every turn. If tonight felt like distance, what would tomorrow reveal? Frank arrived at the wedding venue just after sunrise, the sky still brushed with pale orange light. The big wooden doors of the converted church were propped open, the smell of fresh flowers drifting out like a gentle invitation. He'd come early on purpose, not to take charge, not to insert himself where he wasn't wanted, but simply to be part of the day, to feel included, to feel like a father in his son's life, even if only in small, quiet ways. Inside, a handful of staff moved briskly between rows of white chairs and floral centerpieces. Frank rolled up his sleeves, feeling a familiar sense of usefulness rise in him. He approached the nearest worker. "Anything you need help with, I'm happy to jump in." Before the young man could answer, a crisp voice cut through the room like the snap of a whip. "Oh, Frank, you're here early," Emily's mother, Linda, said with a smile polished enough to shine glass. She glided toward him, clipboard in hand. "That's wonderful. We could definitely use you over there." She pointed toward a stack of folding chairs in the corner, chairs no one else was touching. "We're having Robert handle the important layout decisions," she added brightly. "He has such a good eye for these things." Frank followed her gaze to where Robert stood confidently beside the wedding planner, directing placements like he owned the building. The contrast was unmistakable. One man spotlighted, the other tucked into a shadowed corner of busy work. Frank forced a polite smile. "Sure, happy to help with whatever you need." But inside, something tightened, a quiet bruise forming under the ribs. As he began hauling chairs, he caught sight of Adam across the room. His son was adjusting his suit collar, laughing with someone on Emily's side of the family. Frank waited until Adam finished and approached him, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Morning, son," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "Big day, huh? Thought I'd come early and help out." Adam's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the people he'd been talking to. "Yeah, well, everything's kind of already handled, but thanks." "I just wanted to check in," Frank tried again. "See how you're feeling." "I'm fine, Dad," Adam muttered, already half turned away. "Everything's under control." The dismissal wasn't sharp, but it was cold, so cold it stiffened the air between them. Frank stepped back, letting the distance widen on its own. Mia noticed. She crossed the room with purpose, her dress swaying behind her like a battle flag. "Adam," she whispered sharply, grabbing his arm and pulling him aside near a row of windows. "What's wrong with you? He's trying." Adam pulled his arm away. "I don't need this right now." "You don't need basic respect," she shot back. "You're acting like he's in the way. You're forgetting who raised you." Frank wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried just enough that small fragments reached him, drifting through the air like shards of glass. Adam's voice sharpened. "He never understood the direction I want my life to go, not once. He's always held me back." The words hit Frank with the weight of a physical blow. He froze mid-step, breath catching. He didn't hear the rest, didn't need to. Those pieces alone were enough to unravel something inside him. After years of trying to rebuild connection, this was what lurked beneath Adam's silence and hesitation. Not uncertainty, not nerves. Resentment. Frank set down the chair he was holding, steadying himself. He felt the world shift, just a little, but enough that the floor seemed unfamiliar under his feet. He looked at Adam across the room, standing tall, confident, ready for a life Frank suddenly wasn't sure he was invited into. Mia stormed away from the window, her jaw tight, her eyes flicking briefly toward Frank. She must have realized he'd heard something, maybe not all, but enough to wound. She moved toward him, but before she reached his side, guests began filtering through the open doors. Laughter, chatter, footsteps, they all filled the space quickly, washing over tension but not erasing it. Frank stepped back, giving the arriving crowd room, blending into the background as naturally as a shadow at dusk. He straightened a row of chairs that didn't need straightening, his breath steady but shallow. He tried to shake it off, reminding himself this was Adam's day, not a moment to dwell on hurt feelings. But the sting remained. And as the room filled with warm greetings and festive energy, Frank felt something colder coil in his chest, a sense of foreboding that settled deep and heavy. If the morning felt like this, what would the ceremony bring? The church lawn glowed under the late morning sun, every blade of grass trimmed, every flower bed bursting with color. Guests drifted around the property, laughing, snapping photos of the venue, admiring the carved wooden doors that would soon open for the ceremony. But the real commotion gathered near the fountain, where the wedding photographer barked cheerful commands while adjusting lenses and angles with practiced speed. Frank stood off to the side, hands tucked into his pockets as he watched Adam take his place beside Emily and her family. The photographer lifted his camera. "Perfect. Let's start with the bride and groom with the Carter family." Frank waited for the follow-up and the groom's father, but it didn't come. The photographer shifted Linda to the left, angled Robert's shoulder, pulled Emily closer to Adam. The Carters beamed, radiating the polished confidence of people used to being centered in every room. Flash after flash illuminated their smiles. Frank stayed where he was, awkwardly out of the frame but visible enough that it should have reminded someone, anyone, that he existed. Emily finally glanced toward him. "Oh," she said airily, as if noticing a misplaced decoration. "We'll get some with your dad later." Her tone didn't carry malice, it carried indifference, and somehow that felt worse. Frank nodded politely, even though she'd already turned her attention back to the camera. He watched Adam slip his hand into Emily's like the gesture was second nature, watched him laugh at something Robert whispered, watched the easy warmth in his son's face, warmth Frank hadn't seen directed toward him in years. It hit him like a quiet blow. Adam looked more like a Carter than a Doyle today, not in features but in belonging. The photographer waved them into another formation. "Let's get Emily's siblings in here too. Adam, step in closer. Perfect." Still no mention of Frank. Mia noticed first. She marched toward the photographer with the no-nonsense stride she inherited from her father. "Excuse me," she said, polite but firm. "Are you planning to get photos with the groom's side of the family too?" The photographer blinked, caught off guard. "Oh yes, yes, of course. We'll get to that, just finishing this set." Mia crossed her arms. "He's been waiting." The photographer's eyes darted to Frank, then quickly back to his camera. "Right, okay. Let's do one quick shot with the father of the groom." He said it like an afterthought, like a box to check. Frank forced a smile when Mia motioned him forward, though every step felt like walking into a room where he didn't belong. Adam finally glanced his way, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, as though he just remembered Frank drove him to baseball practice for 12 years straight. "Dad," Adam said, nodding stiffly. "Hey, son," Frank replied, keeping his voice steady, refusing to show how small he felt. The photographer positioned Frank beside Adam, but the spacing was tight and awkward. Everyone else had been arranged carefully. Frank was simply squeezed into open space. Adam shifted closer to Emily, almost unconsciously, leaving a polite but unmistakable gap between himself and his father. "Okay, big smiles," the photographer called. The shutter clicked 3 times, fast, perfunctory, like taking a picture of a receipt before returning it to the cashier. Then Adam immediately stepped away. "Can we go back to the original setup?" the photographer said, already waving Frank aside like a prop no longer needed. Frank stepped back quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a retake. He didn't even adjust his jacket. He simply returned to the edge of the grass where his presence wouldn't disrupt the flow of the Carters' curated celebration. Mia joined him, frustration simmering just beneath her voice. "I'm sorry, Dad. They're just being." "It's fine," Frank murmured. "It's their day." But the words tasted bitter. He watched as Adam, his son, once inseparable from him, wrapped an arm around Emily and posed effortlessly for the next round of photos. Their smiles aligned, their laughter synchronized. The photographer complimented their chemistry, their poise, their perfect angles. Frank felt the weight of it all sinking deeper, not the exclusion alone but the sense of replacement. As if somewhere along the way, without anyone saying it aloud, roles had shifted. As if Adam D traded one family for another, one identity for a shinier, more socially acceptable version. And Frank was being erased, not cruelly but casually. That was the part that shook him. In the swirl of camera clicks and cheerful chatter, a realization settled in his chest, heavy, cold, undeniable. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't the disorganization of a chaotic wedding morning. It was intentional. Subtle, polite, and wrapped in smiles, but intentional. As another round of photos began, with Adam once again front and center among the Carters, Frank felt a quiet dread unfurl inside him. A warning whisper, faint but persistent. If even the pictures were being choreographed without him, what else about today was being scripted? The soft hum of the string quartet filled the converted church, its vaulted ceiling catching every note and floating it upward like a quiet prayer. Guests whispered among themselves, settling into their seats as the last rays of late summer light filtered through stained glass. Frank sat in the second row, hands folded tightly in his lap, trying to steady the mix of nerves and hope pumping through him. Maybe the morning had been rough. Maybe the photos had stung more than he cared to admit. But the ceremony, this sacred moment, might still bring a kind of healing. Maybe standing together under the arch of flowers, hearing vows spoken aloud, would remind Adam that he still had a father who loved him. Frank clung to that thought like a lifeline. When Pastor Helen Briggs stepped forward, her warm smile swept across the room before she began the opening blessing. Her voice carried a gentle sincerity that had comforted Frank in darker times. She spoke of love, commitment, promises built not just for a day but for a lifetime. Then she paused, looking at Adam with a softness that felt almost maternal. "And today," she said, "we honor not only the union before us, but the love that shaped the man Adam has become, including the love of his late mother, who is surely with us in spirit." The words hit Frank with sudden force. His breath tightened, a sting rising behind his eyes before he could stop it. Memories of his wife, her laugh, her patience, the nights they stayed up comforting a feverish Adam, flooded his chest. It was the first moment all day that felt real, not staged or curated for the Carters' perfect image. But the emotion wasn't shared. Emily's parents exchanged a quick, annoyed glance, their whispers sharp and unmistakably displeased. Linda shook her head slightly, as though the mention of Frank's wife was an unnecessary detour from the polished script she preferred. Robert leaned back, expression tight, the slightest sigh slipping through his nose. Frank caught it all. And so did Adam. Each time the pastor referenced Frank, his role as a father, the sacrifices he'd made, the love he'd poured into raising his son, Adam's shoulders stiffened. His eyes didn't lift. His jaw tightened. It was subtle but painfully clear. He wanted distance. He didn't want to be tied to Frank's story today. He didn't want acknowledgement that conflicted with the image he had built beside the Carters. The realization hollowed something inside Frank. Then came the vows. Emily held Adam's hands with glowing adoration as she began, her voice confident, rehearsed to perfection. She spoke about devotion, shared dreams, the life they were building. Then her words shifted. "I want to thank my parents," she said, turning slightly toward Linda and Robert, "for shaping Adam into the man he is, for guiding him, supporting him, and helping him grow in ways no one else could." Guests murmured, some nodding along. But others glanced briefly, awkwardly toward Frank. Because everyone there knew who had raised Adam, who had worked double shifts after losing his wife, who had attended every game, every graduation, every setback. And it wasn't the Carters. Yet Emily never once mentioned Frank, not even a polite nod in his direction. Her praise wrapped tightly around her parents, framing them as Adam's primary influence, as though they'd molded him from childhood rather than meeting him only a few years ago. The slight wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Frank felt the humiliation creep upward from his stomach to his throat. He kept his expression neutral, jaw steady, shoulders squared. But inside he felt something fraying, thin threads snapping one by one. When it was Adam's turn to speak, he kept his vows safe, brief, narrowly focused on Emily. He thanked her parents for their guidance and support, words that landed like quiet blows. When his gaze grazed by Frank, it was fleeting, almost accidental, as though acknowledging him might disrupt the image he wanted to project. The ceremony continued smoothly on the surface, rings exchanged, blessings spoken, applause rising as Adam and Emily sealed the vows with a kiss. Guests stood, cheering, lifting their phones to capture the perfect moment. Everyone seemed. Dee swept in the celebration. Everyone except Frank. He clapped on cue, but it felt mechanical, detached. Inside, something had cracked further, a quiet fracture forming where hope used to be. Not dramatic or explosive, just a slow splintering he couldn't ignore anymore. As the new couple walked down the aisle, hands raised in victory, guests followed with excited chatter. But Frank stayed seated a moment longer, staring at the arch of flowers where promises had been made, promises that somehow left him on the outside. He rose slowly, his legs heavier than they'd been that morning, and as he stepped into the flow of departing guests, a chilling thought pressed against him. If the ceremony held this much quiet disrespect, what would the reception reveal? The reception hall glowed with warm lights strung across wooden beams, casting a soft golden shimmer over the tables dressed in white linen. Laughter drifted through the room, mingling with the clinking of glasses and the upbeat rhythm of the band warming up in the corner. The celebratory energy was undeniable, yet Frank felt strangely detached from it, like he was watching it all from behind thick glass. He stood near the back, letting the noise wash over him as guests congratulated Adam and Emily. After the ceremony's subtle slights, he hoped the reception might offer a gentler moment, maybe even a chance to reconnect with his son. But Adam had spent the first hour wrapped tightly within the Carter family circle, moving through the room as if they were the gravitational center pulling him forward. Then a microphone squealed gently to life. "All right, everyone," the MC announced. "It's time for a few words from the groom." The crowd applauded as Adam stepped up to the small stage, straightening his tie with practiced confidence. Emily beamed beside him. Her parents watched proudly from their table, leaning forward with anticipation. Mia glanced toward Frank, her eyes soft with worry, as if she already sensed the tension in the air. Adam tapped the microphone lightly. Thank you all for being here. It means a lot to us. Today isn't just about a wedding, it's about honoring the people who truly guided me to where I am. The phrasing pricked at Frank's ears. Guided me. He shifted his weight, unaware he'd started holding his breath. Adam continued, voice warming with enthusiasm. First, I want to thank Emily's parents. Linda and Robert, you two have been incredible. Your support, your wisdom, everything you've invested in us, I couldn't be more grateful. Linda placed a hand over her heart, eyebrows lifting theatrically. Robert gave Adam a proud nod. The guests clapped. Some whistled. Adam's smile grew. You've mentored me, believed in me, shown me what real direction looks like, Adam said, his voice shining with admiration. You helped me grow, helped me become a man who could stand beside your daughter. The praise kept flowing, polished, glowing, thorough. Frank listened, his hands tightening around the chair in front of him. He didn't envy the Carters. He didn't begrudge their connection. But the ease with which Adam exalted them, after a lifetime of being raised by a single father, felt like a slow knife turning beneath his ribs. Then Adam inhaled, turning the microphone slightly. And oh, my dad. The shift in tone was instant. Even the room seemed to sense it, the air flattening, the applause fading into a curious hush. Adam chuckled lightly, though it held no warmth. Dad, you did what you could, I guess, but the Carters really helped me grow. A few guests laughed, real laughs, not nervous ones. The kind that suggested they thought Adam was being funny, maybe humble. But the sound sliced through Frank like a blade. His breath hitched. His chest tightened. The room seemed to tilt ever so slightly. He stared at his son, the boy he had raised, protected, supported through scraped knees and late-night study sessions, through grief after his mother's death, through every uncertain turn of adulthood, the boy who now stood in front of a crowd and neatly diminished him with a single, careless line. Beside the stage, Mia's mouth dropped open, her face flushed with shock. She looked at Adam like she didn't recognize him. Frank swallowed hard. He tried to hold steady, but humiliation washed over him in a slow, merciless wave. He could feel eyes shifting toward him, curious glances, pitying ones, some simply unsure of how to react. He didn't look down. He didn't move. He just stood there, absorbing the blow like a man bracing himself against a storm he couldn't escape. On stage, Emily reached for Adam's arm, smiling subtly, her gaze flicking toward her parents. Linda and Robert exchanged a glance, satisfied. There was no surprise on their faces, no discomfort, no regret. As if they'd known this moment was coming. As if they'd practiced it. Frank's vision blurred for a second, the lights smearing into streaks of gold. He blinked hard, grounding himself. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. A slow, cold understanding settled deep in his gut. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't nerves. This wasn't a poorly phrased joke. This was intentional. A public rewriting of loyalties. A declaration that the Carters had replaced him. A wound delivered not in private anger, but in front of every friend, neighbor, and extended family member who had ever known the Doyles. The applause that followed felt distant, muffled, unreal. Adam stepped back from the microphone, unaware or unconcerned about the damage he'd inflicted. Emily squeezed his hand approvingly. Frank didn't move. He simply stood there, pulse pounding, the world tilting around him as he realized something that hurt more than anything else that day. His own son had erased him. And this was only the beginning. Frank was still trying to steady himself, still trying to swallow the humiliation burning through his chest, when a gentle hand touched his shoulder. He turned, startled, and found Pastor Helen Briggs standing beside him. Her eyes were soft, steady, eyes that had watched him walk through grief before. Without a word, she held out the microphone. Frank stared at it, confused. "Pastor, I wasn't planning to." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the music humming behind them. "But I also know you, and I know when a man has something in his heart that needs to be said. The weight of the microphone felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried not just sound but years of unspoken disappointment. Frank hesitated, torn between shrinking into the background or standing in the center of a room that had just witnessed his son diminish him. Every instinct urged retreat, avoidance, safety. But something else, something older than the pain of today, rose inside him. Maybe it was the echo of his late wife's strength. Maybe it was the part of him that had carried Adam through every storm. Or maybe humiliation had a way of hardening resolve. Slowly, Frank closed his fingers around the microphone. The MC stepped aside, signaling to the room. Conversations softened. Glasses clinked one last time before settling onto tabletops. The crowd's attention formed a reluctant, curious circle around him. On stage, Adam's expression flickered. Not surprise, alarm. He looked away immediately, pretending to adjust his jacket, refusing to meet his father's eyes. Frank took a breath. "When Adam was 8, he began, his voice steady but low. He broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in our backyard." A few people chuckled. The memory felt warm, familiar, but Frank's gaze didn't leave the crowd. "I remember sitting beside him in the ER," he continued, holding his hand while he tried not to cry. His mom, she was gone by then. And that night he asked me if I could teach him how to be strong without her. The room quieted further. The music faded entirely. Frank swallowed, the memory thick in his throat. "I told him I'd do my best. I told him I'd stand where she couldn't, that I'd raise him to be a good man, even if I had to figure it out alone." Adam shifted uneasily. Frank continued, his voice gaining a steadier rhythm. "There were years I worked double shifts at the firehouse so Adam could stay in his school, so he could have the tutor he needed, so he could take the college trip he was excited about. I didn't mind. That's what fathers do. We give, quietly without keeping score." Eyes across the room softened. A few guests exchanged subtle glances, surprised. Emily's parents, however, sat stiffly, uncomfortable, their earlier pride dissolving into tight-lipped irritation. "But," Frank said gently, "it's a strange thing, how easy it is for some people to rewrite a man's worth when it suits the moment." Linda Carter's shoulders stiffened. Robert's jaw twitched. Frank didn't name them. He didn't have to. The truth hung between them like a lantern, illuminating everything the wedding had tried to hide. "I'm proud of Adam," Frank said, turning his gaze to his son even though Adam still avoided eye contact. "I always have been, even when he didn't see it, even when life pulled him in directions I didn't understand." Adam's throat bobbed. Still, he didn't look up. "But I want him to remember something today," Frank continued. "A man doesn't grow because someone hands him a roadmap. He grows because someone walks beside him when everything else falls apart." The words were calm, not sharp, not vindictive, but they carried a weight the room couldn't ignore. A hush swept through the guests. Even the staff paused, listening. Frank exhaled, lowering the microphone a fraction. "That's all." He handed it back to Pastor Briggs, his expression composed, not triumphant. He hadn't retaliated. He hadn't begged. He had simply told the truth. Yet the effect was unmistakable. Emily's parents looked rattled, whispering urgently. Guests murmured with new understanding. Mia watched her father with quiet pride. Pastor Briggs squeezed his arm gently. And Adam. Adam finally looked at Frank. Not with gratitude, not with apology. With the uneasy realization that the father he believed he could sideline, erase, even, was not nearly as quiet or as simple as he had assumed. Frank stepped away from the spotlight, his heartbeat steadying as he returned to the edge of the room. But inside him, something shifted. Something that said this wedding wasn't done revealing its wounds. The reception carried on with music and laughter, but beneath the surface, tension moved through the room like a thin electric current, felt more than seen. Conversations resumed, yet every table carried the faint echo of Frank's speech and Adam's earlier humiliation of his own father. The atmosphere had split into two currents, those who admired Frank's composure and those who sensed the fracture forming between father and son. Frank remained near the back, where the shadows softened the sting of the spotlight he just walked out of. He could feel eyes flicking toward him, some sympathetic, others curious, a few judgmental. Whispered commentary drifted through the air like smoke. "Well, he handled that better than I would have. Did you hear what Adam said to him? Unbelievable. Frank showed class, wish the groom had." He didn't respond, didn't engage. He simply stood there, absorbing the mixture of pity and respect while trying to steady the storm churning inside him. His heart was still bruised, but beneath the ache, something steadier had begun forming, something he hadn't felt in years. Resolve. Across the room, however, the storm took a different shape. Emily grabbed Adam by the wrist and pulled him behind one of the decorative columns, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the music. "What was that?" she hissed. "Your father just stole our moment." Adam rubbed his forehead, agitated. "You saw what he did. He ambushed us. He made me look bad." "Made you look bad?" Emily snapped. "You let him overshadow you on your own wedding day." Frank couldn't hear every word, but he saw their faces. The flushed anger, the tense jawlines, the frantic gestures. It didn't take much to piece together the direction of the blame. Adam shook his head, voice rising. "He embarrassed me, Em. Everyone was looking at me like I'd kicked a puppy." Mia appeared before either of them noticed her, hands on her hips, eyes fierce. "Are you serious right now?" she demanded. "You embarrassed him, Adam. Did you already forget what you said into that microphone?" Adam's shoulders tightened. "Stay out of it, Mia." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You humiliated Dad in front of everyone here, and instead of owning that, you're mad he didn't just smile and take it. What is wrong with you?" Adam's face reddened. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Emily's family." "I don't care about the Carters," Mia snapped. "I care that you're treating Dad like he's disposable." Adam opened his mouth, but whatever excuse he was about to give dissolved into frustration. "He always makes things emotional," he said. "Every time. I just wanted today to go perfectly." "Then maybe don't punch holes in your own wedding day," Mia fired back. "You started it." Emily tugged at Adam's arm. "Let's just go, this isn't worth it." Adam let himself be pulled away, but not before throwing a quick glare in Frank's direction. Defensive, wounded, unwilling to see his own part in any of it. Frank met the look calmly, though beneath the surface, something inside him dimmed a little more. The music swelled again and glasses clinked, but for Frank the room had already emptied of warmth. He felt like an outsider in a place where he'd expected to feel connection. He'd tried, God knows he had, but at every turn the door had been quietly pushed closed. He collected his coat, nodding politely to a few guests who murmured soft praises or sympathetic sighs. Mia caught up to him near the exit, breath tight, eyes stormy. "I'm coming with you," she said. He shook his head. "And lie, no, sweetheart, stay. It's your brother's wedding." "But Dad." "I'll be fine," he said. "Really." She studied him, seeing the truth and the hurt and the pride all tangled together. Finally, she hugged him, tight, grounding, and let him go. Frank stepped into the cool night air, the heavy wooden doors shutting behind him with a muffled thud. The silence outside felt almost startling after hours of noise. He walked slowly toward his truck, each step loosening the tight coil in his chest, replacing humiliation with something steadier, darker, more controlled. By the time he slid into the driver's seat, a new vow had formed, quiet, hard-edged, unshakable. "I won't be disrespected again." He started the engine, the headlights carving a path through the darkness as he drove away from the hall, unaware that tonight's wound was only the beginning of a deeper unraveling. Frank woke the next morning with the heavy stillness of a man replaying a wound on loop. The humiliation from the wedding hadn't faded with sleep. It lingered like a bruise deep under the skin, throbbing whenever he let his mind drift toward Adam's voice echoing across the reception hall. The laughter, the dismissal, the cold, effortless erasure. By noon, he'd made up his mind. He drove into town, the sky overcast with the kind of gray that seemed to mirror the grit forming inside him. Victor Lane's law office sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, its brick facade unchanged since the days when Frank and Victor had grabbed beers after Frank's late-night shifts at the firehouse. They'd known each other for decades, which made this conversation harder, but also necessary. Victor looked up from his desk when Frank entered. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, standing to greet him. "Didn't expect to see you this soon after the wedding. Congratulations on—" "Victor," Frank interrupted, voice steady but clipped. "I need to revisit my will." Victor's smile faded, his brows lifted. He gestured for Frank to sit. "All right," he said cautiously. "Let's talk about it." Frank lowered himself into the leather chair across from the desk. His hands rested on his knees, fingers interlocked to keep them from shaking. "I want a full reevaluation of my estate," he said. "Every part of it." Victor leaned back slowly. "Frank, you've had your will set for years. Adam inherits the house, the savings, the pension supplement. Mia gets the rental property. That was your plan since your wife passed." "I know," Frank replied quietly, "but things have changed." Victor studied him, concerned. "What happened?" Frank exhaled and the story spilled out, not with bitterness but with a tired heaviness that felt decades old. He told Victor about the rehearsal dinner, the photos, the ceremony, and finally the speech. How Adam had humiliated him publicly. How the Carters had watched with smug approval. How the laughter rippled through the room like a verdict. And it wasn't just about the wedding. Frank explained the years of subtle distance, the small dismissals, the slow shift of loyalty that he had ignored, excused, forgiven, until he couldn't anymore. When he finished, the room fell quiet. Victor steepled his fingers, thinking. "Frank," he said gently, "changing your will, especially in such a significant way, could permanently fracture your relationship with Adam. This isn't a small adjustment. This is reshaping the entire future he's assumed he has." Frank nodded. "I know. Are you sure this isn't just anger talking?" Frank looked up, meeting Victor's eyes with a steadiness that surprised even him. "It's not just anger," he said. "It's clarity and maybe a little self-respect. I've spent years being patient, and last night showed me exactly where I stand." Victor sighed, pulling out a notepad. "All right, then tell me what you want." Frank hesitated only for a moment. "Shift a significant portion of the assets to Mia." Victor blinked. "How significant?" "Half the house, the bulk of the savings, and the rental property stays with her. That leaves Adam with much less than what he would have inherited." "Adam made his choice long before I made mine," Frank said, the words calmer than he expected. "Mia has stood by me. She's been honest, loyal, caring. She's earned what I can give her." Victor scribbled notes, nodding slowly. "I'll draft the updated documents. You'll need to sign by the end of the week." Frank leaned back, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for years. A strange sensation washed over him, part relief, part sorrow, part something sharper and colder. "Frank," Victor said carefully, "once this is in writing, it sends a clear message, one Adam might not take lightly." Frank looked toward the window, watching the dull afternoon light settle across the street. "I'm not trying to punish him," he said. "I'm trying to be fair." Then, after a beat, he added quietly, "But maybe, part of me is tired of letting everyone else decide my worth." Victor didn't argue. He simply nodded, understanding what wasn't being said. Frank stood, shook his friend's hand, and walked toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt a shift deep inside. not loud or dramatic, but undeniable. He had taken back one small piece of control, one boundary, one reclaiming of dignity. And as he walked out into the gray afternoon, the air felt different, cooler, sharper, charged with purpose. For the first time since the wedding, Frank felt strangely empowered. Yet beneath that strength, a quiet question stirred. How would Adam respond when he learned the consequences of his choices? In the days following the wedding, Frank waited for a call, a text, anything. A small gesture from Adam acknowledging the tension between them. Even an awkward apology would have been enough. But the phone stayed silent. Hours became days, and the silence hardened into something unmistakable. Adam wasn't busy. Adam was avoiding him. And the worst part was how familiar that coldness felt, like an old pattern being repeated with new intensity. Frank tried not to let it eat at him, but the wedding replayed in flashes. Adam's dismissive tone, the laughter, the way he wouldn't look at him when he held the microphone. Each memory was a small cut that hadn't stopped bleeding. One afternoon, while Frank sat on his porch with a mug of cooling coffee, Mia pulled up and climbed out of her car with a determined stride. She'd been checking on him almost daily, sensing something in him she hadn't seen in years. A quiet withdrawal, a slipping back into the emotional numbness he'd drowned in after losing his wife. "Dad," she said, leaning on the porch rail, "have you heard from him?" Frank shook his head. Mia sighed, frustration etched across her face. "I've tried talking to him. He says he needs space, and that you're the one who made things tense." Frank let out a tired breath. "Of course he does." "What does that even mean?" Mia muttered. "You didn't embarrass him, you defended yourself." Frank didn't answer. He simply looked past her, watching a squirrel dart across the yard as if the world hadn't shifted under their feet. Meanwhile, Adam's silence wasn't accidental. Behind closed doors, Emily stoked it intentionally. "You need boundaries," she told him one night as she folded laundry. "Your father guilt trips you. It's emotional manipulation. My parents think you need distance." Adam, already raw from the wedding fallout, absorbed her words like gospel. He nodded, letting her reshape his thoughts the way the Carters reshaped everything else, subtly, consistently, until he believed this perspective was his own. Soon, ignoring Frank became Adam's new normal. Frank decided to reach out once, just once. He sent a simple text, "Can we talk?" No accusations, no judgment, just a father extending a hand. Hours passed. Finally a reply appeared. "Not right now. Things are too tense. I need time, Dad." 2 minutes later, another message followed. "Emily's parents think I need distance to focus on my marriage. Please respect that." Frank stared at the phone, the words carving deep. Not because Adam needed space, but because he had outsourced his voice to people who barely knew him. Mia, standing beside him, read over his shoulder. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "He's acting like the Carters raised him." Frank didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said enough. By the end of the week, the ache inside him evolved into something sharper, self-preservation. And with Victor's warning still echoing in his mind, Frank began gathering years' worth of records. Old folders came out of closets. Receipts were pulled from envelopes labeled in his late wife's handwriting. Tuition payments, loan agreements, checks written for Adam's first car, medical bills from the broken arm, college textbooks, apartment deposits, the things a parent never thinks twice about until someone accuses them of not doing enough. Frank spread them out across the dining table, one by one, the paper trail of decades of devotion. And the more he sifted, the more clarity he found. This wasn't about money, it was about truth. When he brought the stack to Victor's office, the attorney leafed through the documents with growing discomfort. "Frank," he said, "why are you gathering all of this?" Frank exhaled slowly. Because I think Adam's making decisions that aren't his own, and if things get messy, I don't want my name dragged through the mud. Victor nodded, tapping a folder. Keep every one of these just in case. The phrase lingered in the room, sharp as a blade. As Frank drove home with the documents buckled into the passenger seat, something inside him sank deeper. He had always imagined conflict with Adam as loud doors slamming, voices raised. But this quiet fracture, this slow shift of loyalty driven by the Carters' influence, was far more painful. By the time he pulled into his driveway, a new understanding settled into his bones. Adam didn't see him as a father anymore. He saw him as an obstacle, an inconvenience, a piece of history he was trying to rewrite. Frank gathered the folders in his arms, the edges digging into his skin like reminders of everything he had once given freely. And as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him, a quiet chill followed him into the house, one that whispered this widening distance was only the beginning of something much larger. Fall crept in slowly, painting the suburban streets in shades of orange and gold. It had been a few weeks since the wedding, weeks filled with silence, distance, and the lingering aftertaste of emotional betrayal. Frank kept to himself, burying his energy into quiet routines and long walks, trying to keep the hurt from nesting too deeply inside him. But the world had a way of letting truth leak through its cracks. Mia was the first to notice. One evening, she stopped by the small cafe where she often grabbed her after-work coffee. As she waited for her order, she overheard two familiar voices behind her, the maid of honor and one of Emily's cousins. They chatted in hushed tones, laughing nervously. "I heard Adam and Emily are in trouble already," one said. "Financial trouble, big trouble. Emily's parents cut them off, said something about them needing to learn responsibility." Mia froze. She turned, and the two women went silent instantly, their eyes widening. They muttered something about having somewhere to be and rushed out, leaving Mia standing alone, heart pounding. She didn't go home. She drove straight to Frank's house. When he opened the door, Mia walked in without waiting, dropping her purse onto the couch. "Dad, Adam and Emily are struggling, financially, and Emily's parents aren't helping them." Frank blinked, surprised. "The Carters not helping, they practically run the town." "I guess money is where they draw the line," she said. "I thought you should know." Frank nodded slowly, a mix of concern and resignation tightening his chest. He didn't want Adam to suffer, but he also knew this was the kind of fall that came from chasing someone else's version of success. He expected Adam to call Mia next, or maybe try to reconnect with family. He didn't expect his phone to ring 2 nights later, with Adam's name lighting up the screen. Frank stared at the display for several seconds, breath held. Then he answered. "Dad," Adam said quickly, voice strained. "I need to talk to you." Frank leaned back in his chair. "All right, I'm listening." There was a pause, a long, uncomfortable one, before Adam continued. "Things are tight right now. Temporary problem, just a rough patch." Temporary. That word alone told Frank the truth was worse than Adam was willing to admit. "What do you need?" Frank asked calmly. Adam hesitated again, then said, "Money." The word felt like a cold draft slipping into the room. "How much?" Frank asked quietly. "Just support," Adam said. "For the family image, to keep things stable. Emily's parents think it would look bad if we downsized this early." Frank felt the phrase hit his nerves like a spark. "The family image," he repeated. "That's what this is about." Adam exhaled sharply. "Dad, can you not make this dramatic? I just need a little help." Frank's voice stayed steady. "Why should I help someone who publicly humiliated me?" The silence on the other end sharpened instantly. "That was a misunderstanding," Adam snapped. "You blew it out of proportion." "No," Frank replied. "You minimized me in front of everyone, and you've ignored me ever since. but now you call when you need money." Adam's frustration crackled through the speaker. "Because you owe me." Frank froze. "What?" "You owe me," Adam repeated louder this time. "You owe me support. You owe me stability. You owe me a future. I didn't ask to be raised by a single dad who barely kept things together. I deserve more than what you gave." Frank felt something in his chest twist painfully. Not anger, but heartbreak carved deep. All the years of sacrifice, reframed in a single sentence. He inhaled, steadying himself. "Adam," he said softly, "I gave you everything I had. I worked double shifts. I skipped sleep. I missed promotion so I could be home. Your mother died and I still showed up. I never owed you anything. I chose to give you everything." Adam scoffed. "You think that's enough? Emily's parents did more for me in 1 year than you did in 30. Frank closed his eyes, absorbing the blow. "Then ask them for money." "They won't," Adam barked. "They said we need to learn responsibility. So you're the one who has to help." Frank felt the decision settle into place like a stone dropping into still water. "No," he said, "I'm not giving you money." Adam erupted. The floodgate burst. Months, maybe years, of resentment poured out in bitter, swirling waves. "You're selfish. You've always held me back. You never wanted me to rise above your little life. You liked being the hero, liked reminding me of everything you sacrificed. You think your sad story earns you respect." Frank listened, silent, each word etching deeper lines into his heart. The boy he raised was gone, buried under pride, entitlement, and the influence of a family who treated Frank Lee a stain on their perfect world. When Adam finally stopped, breath heaving, Frank spoke with a calmness that felt like the last bit of strength he had. "I didn't hold you back," he whispered. "I just never thought you'd see me as less than a father." He ended the call. The silence afterward felt colder than winter. In that stillness, one truth crystallized. Adam never valued him. He valued what he could take from him. And that loss, quiet, devastating, carried a weight Frank wasn't sure he'd ever forget. 3 days passed without another call. Frank assumed, or maybe hoped, that Adam had let the heated conversation settle into silence. But on the fourth evening, as the sun dipped behind the maple trees and cast long shadows across Frank's front yard, he heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling in fast, too fast. He stepped onto the porch just as Adam slammed his car door and stormed up the walkway. "You're unbelievable," Adam snapped before reaching the steps. "I've been texting you for days. You think ignoring me is going to fix anything." Frank inhaled slowly. Here it was, the confrontation he'd known was coming. "I didn't ignore you," Frank said. "I answered you the first time. My answer hasn't changed." Adam scoffed, climbing the porch steps with quick, angry strides. "Unbelievable. You're actually serious. You're really going to cut me off over one little misunderstanding." Frank remained still, hands loosely at his sides, but his heart was already pounding. It wasn't one misunderstanding. It was years of dismissing me. Years of letting other people define your worth and mine. Adam's face twisted with indignation. "Don't start that martyr act with me." Frank lifted a hand gently, stopping him. "Sit down." "I'm not sitting." "Then stand," Frank said, voice calm. "But listen." Something in Frank's tone, quiet, resolute, made Adam pause. Not willingly, but enough for Frank to continue. "For 30 years, Frank said, I've done everything I could for you. Every birthday, every late-night homework panic, every scraped knee, every hospital visit. I worked overtime shifts to keep a roof over your head. I skipped vacations so you could join school trips. I held you when you cried after your mother died. I made sure you had opportunities I never had." Adam rolled his eyes, but Frank's voice didn't waver. "I never asked for anything back. Not once. I never expected a medal, but I did expect respect." Adam fired back immediately. "Emily's parents respected me more in 1 year than you did in 30. The word struck like a slap. Frank absorbed the blow quietly, letting the sting settle before he responded. Respect, he said softly, isn't bought with money or status. It's earned through honesty, loyalty, and showing up when it matters. And the Carters, they didn't raise you. They don't love you. They invested in an image, not a son. Adam's nostrils flared. You're just jealous of them. Jealous, Frank repeated, almost in disbelief. Son, I don't want their life. I don't want their money. I don't want their world. I wanted a relationship with you. A flicker of doubt moved across Adam's face, just for a second, before pride swallowed it whole. You know what? Adam snapped. Forget it. If you want to ruin this, go ahead. But don't expect me to come crawling back when everything falls apart. He turned sharply, stomping down the steps. Halfway to his car, he spun back around. You'll regret cutting me off, he shouted. You'll regret every part of this. Frank didn't raise his voice. He didn't chase him. He simply watched his son drive away in a spray of gravel. The moment the taillights disappeared, Frank's body sagged, the adrenaline draining out of him so quickly he had to grip the porch railing to steady himself. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of realizing just how far Adam had drifted and how far he was willing to go. The sound of another car pulling into the driveway snapped him from his thoughts. Mia jumped out before the engine even stopped. Dad, she called, worry carved into every syllable. I saw Adam peel out of here like a storm. What happened? Frank exhaled shakily. He didn't try to hide the tremor in his hands. We had words. Mia climbed the steps and immediately wrapped her arms around him, grounding the shaking that had begun spreading through his shoulders. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He shouldn't talk to you like that, not after everything. Frank rested a hand on her back, trying to steady his breathing. He's angry, and he's not thinking clearly. That's not anger, Dad. That's entitlement. He didn't argue. Mia pulled back, her eyes fierce despite the worry. Listen to me. Whatever's coming next, you're not facing it alone. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Frank nodded, letting her words settle deep into the hollow ache inside him. The porch light flickered on as the evening darkened, and for a moment the quiet between them felt heavy, not empty, but arched, because they both knew Adam wasn't done. And Frank wasn't sure what the next strike would look like. But it was coming. The little cafe on Main Street smelled of roasted beans and old wood, the kind of place where conversations softened instead of echoing. Pastor Helen Briggs sat at a corner table, her coat draped over the back of the chair, hands wrapped around a warm mug. She looked up the moment Frank stepped inside, her expression already threaded with concern. Frank, she said gently, rising to greet him, I'm glad you came. Frank hadn't planned to accept her invitation. He didn't want to dissect the wedding, didn't want pity or well-meaning comfort. But something about the pastor's steady voice on the phone, calm, patient, familiar, had given him permission to show up as he was, tired, bruised, and quieter than usual. He sat across from her, the wooden chair creaking beneath him. For a moment they just breathed in the warm cafe air, neither rushing. I saw your face during the reception, she finally said, and I've been thinking about you ever since. Frank nodded, staring at the swirl of steam rising from his coffee. It was a lot. She leaned forward slightly. You've always carried things alone, but some wounds don't heal in isolation. Frank's jaw tightened, not from resistance but from the weight of what he'd been holding back. He hadn't talked to anyone, not really, about the humiliation, the shifting loyalty, the slow unraveling of the relationship he had once believed was unbreakable. I don't even know where to start, he said. Anywhere, she replied, just start. So he did. He told her about Adam's speech, about the laughter, about how the Carters watched him, almost satisfied, as Adam severed decades of fatherhood with a few careless lines. He talked about the years before the wedding, the emotional distance that had started small, like hairline cracks, then widened until light poured through them. He tried to keep his voice even, but a tremor slipped through anyway. "I raised that boy," Frank whispered. "I gave him everything I had, and he treated me like a placeholder, like someone he outgrew." Pastor Briggs listened without interrupting, her expression softening with each word. When he finished, she let the silence settle for a moment, allowing the truth to breathe. "Frank," she said, voice gentle but firm, "unconditional love is a gift, but it doesn't require you to tolerate disrespect." He looked up at her, startled by the clarity of her tone. "You can love your son deeply," she continued, "and still draw boundaries, still expect dignity, still protect yourself from being diminished." Frank swallowed hard. He'd spent so long believing a father should absorb every blow, endure every disappointment for the sake of his child. But maybe that belief had allowed Adam to take him for granted. Maybe it had taught Adam that Frank's love was something he could weaponize without consequence. Before he could respond, the cafe door opened and Mia hurried inside, scanning the room until her eyes found them. She approached, cheeks pink from the cold, her expression tense. "Dad," she said, sliding into the seat beside him without waiting, "I need to tell you something." He straightened, worry flickering. "What is it?" Mia glanced at Pastor Briggs as if asking permission to speak freely. The pastor nodded. "It's about the Carters," Mia said. "They're already talking, gossiping about you, saying you're unstable, jealous, that you're acting out because Adam married into a successful family." Frank's breath left him in a slow, stunned exhale. "They said that?" he asked quietly. Mia nodded, anger burning in her eyes. "They're spinning everything so Adam feels justified in shutting you out." The pastor's lips tightened. That family cares deeply about appearances, and they'll reshape any narrative to protect those appearances. Frank leaned back, the pieces clicking into place one by one. The slights at the rehearsal dinner, the exclusion from photos, Emily's tone, Robert's dismissive glances, the wedding speech, the backlash, the silence afterward. It hadn't been carelessness. It hadn't been misunderstandings. It had been orchestrated. A deliberate repositioning of Adam away from him and toward them, toward their influence, their expectations, their world. Frank felt heat rise in his chest, not from anger alone but from clarity. Finally, painfully, unmistakably, he saw the truth. Emily's family had never intended to welcome him. They intended to replace him. The realization didn't spark rage, it sparked resolve. He sat forward, hands clasped, voice steady. "Then I need to start preparing." Mia frowned. "Preparing for what?" "For whatever comes next," Frank said, "and for reclaiming my dignity. I let them shape the narrative once. It won't happen again." Pastor Briggs gave a small, approving nod. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, rattling the glass softly, as though the world eye self understood something had shifted inside Frank Doyle. This time he wasn't just hurt. He was awakening. Adam had always carried himself with the restless confidence of someone convinced life owed him something. But now, weeks after the wedding, that confidence had thinned into something brittle. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were loud. Creditors began calling. At first the calls trickled in: missed payments, overdue balances, a polite reminder here and there. But soon the reminders became warnings. Statements marked urgent arrived in the mail. Emails piled up unopened, and every phone vibration sent a ripple of tension through the apartment. Emily noticed, and she didn't handle pressure quietly. One evening, after yet another phone call went unanswered, she stood in the doorway of their bedroom, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Adam," she said, voice clipped, "this is getting embarrassing." Adam rubbed his temples. "I'm handling it." "You're not," she replied. "My parents already think we don't know how to manage money, and we are proving them right." He looked at her sharply. "Your parents cut us off. How was I supposed to?" "That's the point," she snapped, stepping closer. They want you to figure it out, to show initiative, to fix things. His shoulders stiffened. I am trying. Emily exhaled hard through her nose, frustration simmering. Well, maybe you should talk to your father again. Adam's jaw clenched. We already tried that. Maybe you didn't try hard enough, she said softly, though the softness carried an unmistakable edge. Your dad loves a good redemption story. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you want to make things right. He'll help if he thinks you're being sincere. Adam stared at her, realization dawning. She wasn't suggesting reconciliation. She was suggesting strategy. And Adam, cornered by mounting debt and shrinking pride, decided to try. 2 days later, Frank heard a hesitant knock on his door. He opened it to find Adam standing there, hair unkempt, eyes tired, posture tight with discomfort. But there was something else too, something rehearsed in the way he forced a soft smile. Dad, Adam said, voice light, almost practiced. Can we talk? Frank studied him silently for a long moment before stepping aside. Adam walked in, glancing around the living room as though expecting judgment to be sitting on the furniture. Frank remained standing. What's on your mind? Adam inhaled deeply, then launched into a speech that felt polished at the edges. I've been thinking about everything, the wedding, how I spoke to you, how things have been between us. I wasn't fair. I let stress get to me. I shouldn't have said those things. Frank listened, not interrupting. But no matter how carefully Adam arranged the words, something was off. There was no humility behind them, no genuine remorse. Just a man performing contrition because he needed something. Adam continued, I want us to get back on good terms. I want us to move forward. Frank nodded slowly. I see. And Adam added casually, we're in a bit of a financial bind right now. Nothing major, just temporary. If you could help, just for a while, it would take the pressure off. Then we can rebuild from there. There it was. The real reason. Frank felt the old ache stir, but this time he didn't drown in it. He simply took a breath and met his son's eyes. No, he said gently. Adam blinked. What? No, Frank repeated. I'm not giving you money. The shift was immediate. The mask fell. The apology evaporated. Adam's posture stiffened, his brows collapsing into furious disbelief. You didn't even think about it, he accused. You didn't even consider helping. I have thought about it, Frank said. Every day since you humiliated me, and every day since you treated me like I'm only useful when you need something. Adam stepped closer, voice rising. I apologized. You performed an apology, Frank corrected. Those aren't the same. You know what? Adam snapped. You're impossible. Emily's parents respected me more in 1 year than you did in my entire life. Frank didn't flinch this time. His voice stayed steady. Respect isn't given to the one with the biggest checkbook. Respect is earned. And you stopped treating me like a father long before I stopped helping you. Adam's face reddened, fury climbing up his neck. You owe me. After everything I've put up with from you, you owe me. Frank exhaled slowly, and for the first time in decades, he stopped protecting Adam from the truth. You're not entitled to me, he said quietly. Not my time, not my money, not my forgiveness, not anymore. The words landed with the sharpness of a door closing in a silent house. Adam stared at him, stunned, not because he disagreed, but because Frank had finally said what he'd always refused to say. His pride absorbed the injury like salt on raw skin. Fine, Adam spat. Enjoy being alone, old man. He stormed past Frank, slamming the door. So hard the frame rattled. Moments later, Mia's car pulled in. She hurried inside, finding her father standing in the living room, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally choosing himself. Oh, Dad, Mia whispered, pulling him into an embrace. He didn't cry, he didn't collapse. But he held her tightly, knowing the storm was far from over, and knowing he would no longer face it as a man being diminished, but as a man awakening to his own worth. The Carters' home sat on a manicured hill overlooking the neighborhood, a place designed to impress without ever appearing as if it needed to. 1 week after Adam's last explosive visit to Frank's house, Linda and Robert hosted a dinner party there, the kind with catered hors d'oeuvres, soft jazz humming beneath the chatter, and a guest list curated to elevate their social standing. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Guests leaned in close around the dining table, sipping wine while Linda spoke in her trademark faux-concerned tone. "It's just sad," she sighed. "Frank hasn't been the same since his wife passed, emotionally unstable and financially too. Adam's been carrying so much." Robert chimed in with a slow shake of his head. "The poor man means well, but grief changes people, and jealousy, well, that does the rest." A few guests murmured sympathy. Others exchanged looks, some uncertain, some entertained. Not one of them questioned the Carters' version of the truth. As intended. But the world is smaller than people like the Carters believe. 2 days later, Mia heard about the dinner from a coworker who attended. The moment the words left the woman's mouth, they were talking like your dad is unstable, like he's jealous of Adam's success. Mia's blood lit up with fury. She didn't wait. She drove straight to Emily and Adam's apartment. Emily opened the door, eyebrows lifting in polite surprise. "Mia, is everything okay?" "No," Mia said flatly, brushing past her. "We need to talk." Emily closed the door slowly, masking irritation beneath a thin smile. "All right, what's going on?" "I heard about the dinner your parents hosted," Mia said, arms crossed, her voice steady but sharp. "I heard what they said about Dad, that he's unstable, that he's jealous, that he's falling apart financially, and you just let them say that." Emily's expression fluttered just for a moment before she molded it into innocence. "I don't know who told you that, but that's not accurate. My parents would never insult your father. People exaggerate things." "Don't lie to me," Mia snapped. "Your parents have been looking down on him since the rehearsal dinner, and now they're spreading rumors because Dad wouldn't bankroll your lifestyle." Emily stiffened, her politeness slipping. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" Mia asked. "Because it sounds to me like you and your parents are trying to justify Adam cutting our father out of his life." Before Emily could respond, Adam stepped out from the hallway. "What's going on?" Mia turned to him, hoping, despite everything, that he might finally see what was happening around him. "Your in-laws are telling people Dad's unstable, jealous, broke. They're making him look like he's losing it, and you're letting them." Adam frowned, not with concern but with annoyance. "My parents-in-law wouldn't do that. They're just trying to help us maintain our image." "Your image," Mia repeated, incredulous. "Dad's reputation is not disposable, so you can protect your pride." Adam crossed his arms. "Mia, stop. You're buying into gossip. My parents-in-law care about me. They've supported me more than Dad ever has." Mia stared at him, heartbreak and disbelief mixing into something sharp. "He raised you alone. They've known you for 2 years." "That's enough," Adam snapped. "I'm not going to listen to you attack Emily's family just because Dad can't keep his emotions together." Mia stepped back slowly, realizing the truth she didn't want to accept. Adam was blind to manipulation, not by accident but by choice. He wanted to believe the narrative that made him a victim and the Carters his rescuers. When she left the apartment, she didn't go home. She went straight to Frank. He was sorting tools in the garage, trying to busy his hands to quiet the turmoil inside. Mia told him everything, every rumor, every phrase twisted by the Carters, every denial from Adam. Frank stood still for several seconds, one hand braced against the workbench. The betrayal didn't shock him. It simply solidified into something harder, something with edges. "So that's how they want to play it," he murmured. Mia's eyes filled with worry. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. It was Victor. Frank stepped aside to take the call. Frank, Victor said, voice serious, I've been looking into a few things. If Adam's financial situation keeps unraveling, he might take some desperate measures, legal measures, ones that could involve your name. You need to be prepared. Frank closed his eyes. I understand. Keep your documents close, Victor continued, and be ready for conflict. When Frank hung up, the weight of everything settled fully onto his shoulders, not crushing him but sharpening him. Mia stepped closer. Dad. Frank looked at her, and for the first time since the wedding, his expression carried a clarity that felt cold and resolute. They wanted to paint me as unstable, he said quietly, but they're about to see exactly how steady I can be. Mia nodded, sensing the shift. The line between father and son had frayed before. Now it began to tear. Frank wasn't expecting the call. He wasn't expecting Victor's voice to sound that tight either, measured, but carrying the strain of someone trying to deliver news without making it explode. Frank, Victor said, I need you to come down to the office, now. Frank set aside the tools in his hands, sensing the shift in the air. What's wrong? Victor hesitated. It's about Adam. Frank's heart dropped. I'll be there in 10. He drove with the kind of focus that comes from a lifetime of emergencies. Hands steady, breaths controlled, mind racing through possibilities he didn't want to believe. But nothing he imagined prepared him for the folder Victor pushed across the desk when he arrived. Loan applications, credit documents, a financial form with Frank's name, typed neatly on the guarantor line, and none of it bearing Frank's signature. It felt like the ground slipped under him. Your son tried to use your name as collateral, Victor said quietly. He forged the consent line. The bank flagged the inconsistency and called me because they know I handle your estate. Frank stared at the papers, the typed letters blurring for a moment. He used M. Why name? Victor nodded, illegally. Frank's hands tightened on the edge of the desk. He wasn't just hurt, he was stunned. This was a line Adam had never crossed before. He had begged for money, demanded it, tried guilt, but this was betrayal in its purest form. Frank rose without a word and walked out the door. He drove straight to Adam and Emily's apartment, each mile tightening the knot in his chest. When Adam answered the door, he looked exhausted, unshaven, eyes rimmed in red, the weight of debt and pressure carved into his shoulders. But when he saw Frank holding the folder, his face drained of color. Dad, wait, let me. Frank stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Explain this. Adam swallowed hard, glancing toward the hallway as if hoping Emily would appear and save the moment. When she didn't, he tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Dad, I was desperate. You forged my name, Frank said, voice low. You tried to tie my financial life to yours without my consent. Do you understand what that means? Adam's composure cracked instantly. He pressed a hand to his forehead. I know, I messed up, but I did it for a reason. Frank stared, stunned. What reason could possibly justify this? Adam's voice broke. Emily's parents think I'm irresponsible. They said I needed to prove myself. I thought, if I fixed the debt quietly, if I made everything look stable, they'd respect me. Emily would respect me. I just wanted them to see I wasn't a failure. Frank felt something inside him twist painfully. You did this, he whispered, for their approval. Adam nodded, tears in his eyes now. I didn't do it for me, Dad. I did it for her, for them. I didn't want to embarrass her. I didn't want to lose her respect. Frank felt his heartbreak turn cold, cold enough to crystallize into clarity. Adam hadn't been manipulated into this. He had chosen it. Chosen their approval over integrity. Chosen status over family. Chosen the Carters over the man who raised him from the ashes of grief. Before Frank could speak again, Emily emerged from the bedroom, arms crossed tightly. Her eyes didn't carry shame or apology, only annoyance. So she said, "He told you." Frank looked at her, disbelief smoothing into calmness. "He forged my name on a loan." Emily lifted her chin. "And what were we supposed to do? You left us no choice. Adam asked for your help and you refused. We had to protect ourselves." Frank blinked slowly. "No choice. You always have a choice. You just didn't like the one I made." Emily scoffed. "Oh, please. This wouldn't have happened if you weren't so dramatic at the wedding. You created this rift." Frank's voice remained quiet, but something in it had sharpened. "I didn't forge anyone's name. I didn't rewrite stories about who raised Adam. I didn't cut my son out of photos or tell strangers he was unstable. That was you. You and your parents." Emily flinched, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. Adam stepped forward, voice cracking. "Dad, please don't do this. I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have done it, but please don't turn your back on me." Frank looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy he once carried on his shoulders, now buried under years of insecurity and the Carters' influence. "I'm not turning my back," Frank said softly. "I'm finally standing up straight." Adam's breath hitched. Frank continued, "I'm cutting all financial ties. You will not use my name. You will not use my credit. You will not use my sacrifices as leverage. And as of today, you are removed from my inheritance." Adam's knees seemed to buckle. His face collapsed, not just in fear but realization, raw, crushing realization. "No, Dad, please, you can't." "I can," Frank said. "And I have to, because love without boundaries becomes permission, and I've given you permission to hurt me long enough." Adam fell to the edge of the couch, burying his face in his hands. Small, broken sounds escaped him. Emily stepped back, stunned by the shift she hadn't anticipated. The room felt thick with unraveling. Frank turned toward the door. Adam's voice cracked behind him, fragile, devastated. "Dad, I'm sorry. Please don't leave." Frank paused, one hand on the doorframe. "You're not losing me because you made mistakes," he said quietly. "You're losing me because you chose everyone else's respect over mine." And with that, Frank stepped into the hallway, a heaviness in his chest, but also a clarity that finally, painfully, set him free. The fallout came faster than Adam ever expected. Banks didn't overlook forged signatures. Loan officers didn't forget legal liabilities. And the Carters, despite all their polished smiles and polished influence, did nothing to shield him once the scandal broke. Within a week, Adam received a formal notice. Potential charges pending for fraudulent use of another party's identity. He stared at the letter in disbelief, his hands shaking so violently he nearly tore it in half. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in around him, the same walls he once thought symbolized success, adulthood, a new chapter. Now they felt like a cage built on appearances he could no longer maintain. Emily walked in as he held the letter. "What's that?" she asked, glancing at the trembling paper. Adam couldn't speak, he just handed it to her. As she read, her expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally embarrassment. "Adam," she whispered harshly, "how could you let it get this far?" "Me?" Adam's voice cracked. "You knew we were drowning, you told me to fix things." "I didn't tell you to break the law," she snapped, lowering her voice when the neighbor's door opened down the hall. "Do you know how this looks? Do you know what this will do to our reputation?" There it was again, reputation. Not love. Not support. Not partnership. Emily paced the room, avoiding his eyes. "My parents are furious," she added. "They said they won't be involved at all. They can't be associated with this." Adam stared at her, stunned. "I did this for us, for you." She shook her head quickly. "No, you did this without thinking, and now you've put all of us in jeopardy. I can't be part of this mess." She grabbed her purse, her coat, her phone. Adam rose to his feet. "Emily, wait." But she was already at the door. "I need space," she murmured, not looking back. "And so do my parents." The door shut gently, but the sound hit Adam like a shout. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Shame washed over him, not the performative shame he showed to soften Frank, but the raw, undeniable kind that punches a man straight in the gut. For the first time in his adult life, Adam understood what Frank had been protecting him from. Debt, manipulation, image-driven expectations. People who loved the idea of him, not the reality. And now, when he needed support the most, they abandoned him with barely a pause. The hearing took place 3 days later in a small, crowded courthouse. Adam arrived alone at first, rumpled suit, puffy eyes, shoulders curled inward. He felt every stare, every whisper. He felt the weight of what he'd done. But when he stepped inside the courtroom, he froze. Frank was already there, sitting quietly in the back row. Not smiling, not softening the moment, just present. Adam swallowed hard, something tightening painfully in his chest. He walked past his father slowly, unable to make eye contact but unable to ignore him either. The proceedings moved quickly. The judge reviewed the documents, listened to statements, acknowledged the seriousness of forging a signature. Then she turned her gaze toward Frank. "Mr. Doyle," she said, "do you wish to pursue full charges?" The courtroom went silent. Frank stood. He looked at Adam, really looked at him, seeing the shame, the fear, the unraveling of pride. "No, Your Honor," he said. "I'm not here to destroy my son's future. I just want the legal record corrected." The judge nodded. She issued a warning, required restitution, mandated financial counseling, and formally dismissed any potential criminal penalties, thanks solely to Frank's intervention. Adam didn't move. He couldn't. He sat there frozen, the relief hitting him with the force of something almost unbearable. After the hearing, Adam stepped into the hallway. Emily wasn't there. Her parents weren't there, not even a text. But Frank was. He approached slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, posture steady but weary. Adam tried to speak, but emotion closed his throat. Frank broke the silence first. "Let us be clear," he said gently. "I didn't do this to excuse what you did. Forging someone's name, that crosses a line you can't cross again. Ever." Adam nodded, blinking back tears. "But," Frank continued, "you're my son, and I'm not going to let one terrible decision define the rest of your life." Something inside Adam cracked open then, not pride but guilt. The real kind. The kind that makes a man see himself honestly for the first time. Frank could see it happening. As they stepped out of the courthouse, Adam trudged beside him quietly, humiliated but sobered. Every step revealed more of what he hadn't understood before. The protection Frank had always provided, the stability he'd taken for granted, the difference between real loyalty and conditional approval. At the curb, Adam finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry." Frank studied him, not with softness, not with anger, but with a measured understanding. He nodded once. "We'll talk about it, but not today." Adam swallowed, eyes wet, emotion raw. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking at Frank with defensiveness, or entitlement, or practiced frustration. He was looking at him with remorse. Real, painful, overdue remorse. And the road ahead, though uncertain, had finally shifted toward truth. The apartment Adam moved into was a far cry from the polished, magazine-perfect hoe Emily had curated. This place was small, one bedroom, thin carpeting, a kitchen with cabinets that didn't quite close all the way. The walls were bare, the lighting dull, the hum of an old refrigerator filling the silence. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't impressive. It was honest. Adam stood in the middle of the living room surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, the weight of everything he'd lost pressing onto his shoulders like an unwelcome coat. He had traded polished appearances for a space that reflected the truth. He was starting over, alone. He sat on the edge of the futon he'd bought second-hand. For the first time in months, maybe years, he let himself feel the full gravity of his choices. The forged signature, the entitlement, the hurt he'd inflicted on the one man who'd always stood by him. Shame simmered inside him, quiet but persistent. After nearly an hour of staring at the floor, Adam picked up his phone. Not to call the Carters, they hadn't reached out since the hearing. Not to call Emily, she had sent a single text 2 days prior. "I need time to process. Please don't contact me." He opened his contacts and hesitated over one name. Dad. His thumb hovered. He took a deep breath, then called. Frank answered on the fourth ring. His voice was wary, cautious, almost bracing. "Adam." "Dad, I'm not calling for money," Adam said quickly, the words tumbling out. Frank didn't respond right away. Adam could almost hear him evaluating, weighing the sincerity. "All right," Frank finally said. "What do you need?" Adam swallowed hard. "Guidance, just guidance. I don't know how to get back on my feet. I don't know where to start." Frank leaned back in his kitchen chair, staring at the notepad where he had been writing down monthly expenses. Part of him softened at the vulnerability in Adam's voice. Another part stiffened, protective of the boundaries he fought so hard to build. "I can talk," Frank said, "but I'm not fixing things for you." "I know," Adam murmured. "I don't want you to. I need to fix this myself." Those words, a simple acknowledgement of responsibility, shifted something inside Frank. Later that evening, Mia stopped by and found Frank sitting in the living room, phone still on the table, expression conflicted. "You talked to him," she said gently. "I did," Frank replied. "He wants guidance, says he's trying to figure things out." Mia lowered herself onto the couch beside him. "That's good." Frank rubbed a hand over his face. "Is it? Or is it just another slow step back toward depending on me?" Mia reached over, placing a hand on his arm. "Dad, letting him earn his way back isn't the same as letting him walk all over you. You set boundaries. You finally stood up for yourself. Now you can help him if he does the work." Frank nodded, absorbing her words. "I'm just afraid of being blindsided again." "That's why you don't rush," Mia said. "Let him rebuild, let him prove it." Over the next week, Adam began calling, not constantly, not frantically, but occasionally, like someone learning how to communicate honestly for the first time. He asked practical questions: how to budget monthly bills, how to negotiate with creditors, how to find stable part-time work while sorting out the loan settlement. Never once did he ask for money. Instead, he asked, "How did you handle things after Mom died? How did you juggle everything alone? How did you stay grounded when everything felt like it was slipping?" Frank answered, slow and cautious at first, but each conversation brought a small thaw between them. He coached Adam through creating spreadsheets, setting reminders, contacting loan officers. He didn't fix anything. He simply handed Adam the tools he'd never taken before. And Adam, he used them. He found a modest job at a hardware store. He set up payment plans. He stuck to a budget so tight it startled him. He walked instead of driving to save gas. He cooked instead of spending money eating out. Humility replaced pride. Routine replaced panic. Honesty replaced excuses. Every time Adam managed a small success, he called to share it. And Frank listened. Sometimes, after they hung up, Frank would sit quietly on the porch, staring at the fading sunlight. In those pauses, he saw flickers, small but unmistakable, of the boy he raised. The boy who used to ask him how to fix broken toys. The boy who once clung to Frank's hand in crowded places. The boy who lost his mother and leaned on the only parent he had left. Those glimpses didn't erase the past, but they softened the jagged edges of it. One evening, Adam invited Frank to see the new apartment. Frank hesitated, then agreed. When he stepped inside, he didn't see failure. He saw effort, determination, the beginnings of a man rebuilding. They talked for nearly an hour, quietly, carefully, not father and child, not enemies navigating old wounds, but two men speaking honestly for the first time in years. As Frank left, Adam followed him to the door. "Dad," he said, "See, unsteady, thank you for not giving up on me even when I deserved it." Frank paused on the threshold, the cool night brushing his face. "We're working on it," he replied, "both of us." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, real felt like enough to move forward. Slowly, cautiously, but forward. Adam showed up at Frank's house on a gray Tuesday afternoon, hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket, posture humbled in a way Frank had never seen before. He didn't knock with urgency or expectation, just a soft tap, the kind that carried uncertainty. Frank opened the door. "Hey," he said quietly. Adam managed a small nod. "Do you have a minute?" They settled at the kitchen table, the same one where Frank had once sorted tuition bills and birthday invitations, where long ago arguments had been softened by late-night snacks and quiet apologies. But today the air felt different, calmer, tentative, as if both men were testing the strength of new footing. Adam cleared his throat, fingers tapping nervously against the ceramic mug in front of him. "I need help," he said. "Not money, just help understanding things I should have learned a long time ago." Frank didn't speak, letting him continue. "Like how to manage a basic budget," Adam said. "How to actually live within my means. How to stop chasing things that don't matter." He lifted his eyes, meeting Frank's with an honesty that felt raw. "I don't want you to fix anything for me. I want you to teach me." Frank's breath eased out slowly. For the first time, Adam wasn't performing. He wasn't proving anything. He wasn't trying to impress the Carters or posture for Emily. He was simply asking, with humility instead of entitlement. "All right," Frank said, nodding. "I can do that." They spent the next hour going through simple spreadsheets and weekly planning. Nothing flashy, nothing beyond the basics. And Adam listened. Really listened. Not defensively, not impatiently, but with the focus of someone determined to rebuild from the ground up. The next day, the next crack arrived. A text from Emily. Short clinical final. "I'm filing for separation. I hope you understand. We want different things, Adam. Not we need to talk. Not I'm hurt. Not let's try again. Just a decision, neat, swift, distant." Adam stood in Frank's doorway holding the phone, his expression oddly calm. "She's done," he said softly. "She wants out." Frank studied him carefully. "How do you feel about that?" Adam shrugged, not out of apathy but acceptance. "I think I married into a world I never belonged to. I wanted their approval so badly I didn't see the cost, and now I don't even know who I was trying to become." Frank felt a heaviness, not sadness for the marriage ending but sadness for the illusion Adam had been chasing for years. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not," Adam replied. "Not anymore." They sat on the porch afterward, the air crisp with early fall. Leaves scraped along the sidewalk, carried by light winds that rustled the trees. Adam stared at the yard like he was seeing it through new eyes. "I thought the Carters loved me," he said quietly, "or at least valued me, but the moment things got messy they walked away, all of them." Frank nodded. "People who only stay for the good parts were never staying for you." Adam's voice tightened. "They dropped me the second I became inconvenient, the second I was useful." Frank looked out toward the street. "That's not love, Adam, that's image." Silence stretched between them, long but not uncomfortable. Then Adam turned to him, his voice trembling slightly. "Dad, thank you for being there at the hearing, for answering my calls, for not abandoning me like they did." Frank swallowed, a slow warmth unfolding inside him. After everything, After the humiliation, the disrespect, the forged signature, he hadn't expected gratitude, not genuine gratitude. "You're still my son," he said softly. "That doesn't mean I'll ignore boundaries, but I'm not walking away." Adam nodded, the emotion in his eyes unmistakable. "I get that now, I really do." Something in Frank loosened, something that had been wound tight since the wedding, maybe even for years before that. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a restored relationship wrapped in perfect forgiveness. It was something quieter, truer. For the first time, Frank felt his son actually see him, not as a source of money, not as an obstacle, not as a man overshadowed by the Carters' influence, but as a father. The foundation wasn't rebuilt yet, but it had finally stopped cracking. And somewhere inside Frank, something long dormant began to steady itself, preparing for the next step neither man fully understood yet. Thanksgiving arrived quietly that year without the noise of extended relatives or the chaos of old traditions. Frank kept the invitation list simple, just him, Mia, and Adam. No neighbors, no church friends, no attempts to pretend things were perfect. Just the three people who were finally learning how to stand in the same room again. The house smelled of roasted turkey and herbs, the same recipe Frank's late wife had used. He followed it as best he could, though he didn't pretend it tasted quite the same. Still, the effort felt meaningful, like honoring a foundation they'd all forgotten they still had. Mia arrived first, carrying a pie and wearing the kind of smile that hid worry in its corners. "Looks good in here," she said, eyeing the table Frank had set with mismatched plates and cloth napkins he'd ironed twice. "It'll do," Frank murmured. Then Adam arrived. He stood at the doorway a moment before stepping in, hesitant, as if unsure he had the right. He wasn't dressed up, just jeans and a sweater, but something about his posture was new, humble, present, braced for accountability rather than avoiding it. "Hey," Adam said quietly. Frank nodded, "Hey." They sat at the table without ceremony. The food was passed around with soft thanks, clinking utensils, uneven small talk. The first few minutes felt fragile, like everyone was afraid to breathe too deeply and crack the moment. But halfway through the meal, Adam set down his fork and cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "I need to say something." Mia stopped cutting her turkey. Frank looked up slowly. "Go ahead." Adam took a breath that shook on the way out. "I owe you a real apology, not the kind I used to give when I wanted something, the real kind." Frank didn't respond. He just listened, something he'd learned to do again. Adam continued, words thick and honest. "I'm sorry for humiliating you at my wedding, for acting like the Carters were more important than you, for believing their version of you instead of the truth I lived with my whole life." He looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry I treated you like a wallet and not a father, and I'm sorry for the resentment I carried around for years without understanding where it even came from." Frank felt the world quiet around him, as though the air itself wanted to hear this. Adam swallowed hard. "I thought you were holding me back. I thought you didn't believe in me. But the truth is, I never understood what you were carrying after Mom died. I never understood what you gave up for us. And instead of trying to understand, I blamed you." Mia's eyes glistened. The house felt warmer, still fragile but warmer. Frank took a breath, letting the apology settle into places still bruised. "Adam," he said softly, "I appreciate that, more than you know." He paused, searching for words he hadn't spoken out loud in years. "But I wasn't perfect either. After your mom died, I shut down. I thought being strong meant being silent. I thought if I didn't talk about the grief, you wouldn't feel it." He looked away for a moment. "That distance, that was on me, and I'm sorry for that." Adam's eyes filled. "I don't blame you," he whispered. "Not anymore." Mia placed a hand over Frank's and another over Adam's, bridging the space between them. "We can't change the past," she said gently, but we can do better now." They sat there for a long moment, three people reshaping themselves at a table meant for healing rather than celebration. Dinner resumed slowly, conversation loosening, laughter returning in small, cautious bursts. They talked about work, about Mia's plans for a winter trip, about the hardware store where Adam was getting along better than expected. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just honesty, just presence, just a family trying again. When dessert came, Adam leaned back and exhaled, almost smiling. "This feels different," he said quietly, "in a good way." Frank nodded. "It does." And in the flickering glow of the dining room candles, he felt something settle inside him, a calm he hadn't felt since before the wedding, maybe before the grief that stole so many years. They weren't fixed. They weren't perfect. But they had stopped breaking. And as the evening wound down, Frank sensed that the next chapter, whatever it held, would be built on something stronger than apology. It would be built on truth. The air carried the first bite of late fall, crisp enough to sting but warm enough to remind Frank of change, a different kind of change than the one that had torn his family apart months ago. This change felt gentler, steadier, like the slow return of trust after a storm. The community center buzzed with small-town energy, local vendors, volunteers arranging chairs, kids running between tables of donated goods. A banner hung above the small stage, Neighborhood Renewal Night. Adam had been planning the event for weeks. Frank knew because he'd heard about it in pieces, quiet updates, cautious pride, the kind of detail someone shared only when they were building something from the ground up and wanted to do it right. When Adam spotted Frank walking toward the entrance, his face lit with a nervous but genuine smile. He jogged over, rubbing palms on his jeans, the way he used to before basketball games. "You made it," Adam said. "Of course," Frank replied, "wouldn't miss it." They walked inside together. The room wasn't glamorous, but it hummed with sincerity. Neighbors reconnecting, local business owners offering advice, a small display showing Adam's volunteer work organizing donations and repairs for senior homes. It wasn't the image-driven world D once chased. It was real, grounded, earned. When Adam stepped onto the stage to open the program, Frank found a seat near the front. He watched as Adam spoke, not with bravado, not with the rehearsed charm he once used for the Carters, but with humility. "So many people helped make this happen," Adam said. "People who believed in second chances and new beginnings." His voice steadied. "For me, that includes my father." Frank felt his breath catch, not from pride alone, but from the quiet weight of being recognized by the son who had nearly erased him. After a few presentations from volunteers, Adam returned to the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, then down at Frank. "Dad," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion, "would you come up here?" The room turned. Frank's pulse quickened. He walked slowly toward the stage, unsure what waited for him, until Adam pressed the microphone into his hand with both of his. "Speak," Adam murmured. "Not because you have to, because I want people to hear you, because I'm grateful." It felt like the universe rewinding the moment he'd been denied at the wedding, the moment taken from him, twisted into humiliation. Except now, the spotlight didn't feel like judgment. It felt like restoration. Frank stood at the center of the stage, the microphone cool in his hand, the crowd quiet but welcoming. Adam stepped back, lowering his head, not in shame but in respect, a gesture that carried more sincerity than any apology. Frank exhaled slowly and began. "I've spent my life learning one thing," he said. "Respect doesn't come from money, it doesn't come from titles or connections or who applauds you when you're shining." He looked out across the room, eyes settling briefly on Adam. "Respect comes from how you treat people when no one is watching, how you show up, how you honor where you came from." A hush settled, warm and attentive. "It's easy to forget your roots," Frank continued. "Easy to chase approval from people who don't know your story. But dignity, the real kind, comes from remembering who stood with you in the dark chapters, not just the bright ones." Adam raised his eyes, listening with a stillness that carried more meaning than words. "And sometimes," Frank added softly, "life forces you to start over. Starting over isn't failure. It's choosing to grow, choosing to become someone you can be proud of." He lowered the microphone. "That's all." Applause rose, not loud, not explosive, but heartfelt. The kind that wrapped around Frank like a quiet affirmation he'd waited months to feel. As he stepped off the stage, Adam met him halfway. "Thank you," Adam said, voice thick, "for showing up, for speaking, for everything I didn't understand until now." Frank placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're getting there, one step at a time." They walked outside together, the cool fall evening wrapping around them. Leaves drifted across the pavement. The streetlights glowed softly, illuminating two silhouettes moving side by side, no longer divided, no longer strangers. For the first time in a long, painful journey, Frank felt something settle deep in his chest. Closure. Not the sharp kind that comes from revenge. Not the hollow kind that comes from winning an argument. But the quiet, solid kind that comes from finally being valued. The real revenge wasn't humiliation, it was being seen. Being respected. Being chosen again by the son he never stopped loving. And as the night deepened around them, Frank walked forward with a peace he had earned the hard way.